Okay, let's dive into some of the specific building questions because there are a lot of them that I've been getting.
Okay.
And I actually think starting with land might make the most sense. Most of the people that I'm hearing from right now are in the land buying phase of it, though they're
Hmm.
thinking about the building phase because they're calculating costs and things like that.
Yeah,
But I get a lot of questions about land. So let's start there. When if you were looking around for land specifically for your designs, what are some of the things that you would suggest people pay attention to in the land?
that's a hard one to.
What would you look?
Well, what would I look for? I would look for, um, because they tend to be more interesting and they also tend to be less expensive. I'd look for places that are not at first glance, maybe the prettiest thing around. Rocky or, a little scraggly, maybe a bit hard to get to. The the upside is they're more interesting than your picture postcard, level ground, a few big trees, little meadow. Yes, if you find that, okay, grab it. If you but don't be afraid of sites that are a little bit difficult looking. They're usually less money. That's what I would look for. Um, Depends on how. I would say if you are going to be staying in the city, um, if you can't afford something that's close to the city, it needs to be the building or the place needs to be close enough to somewhere that you could go for a week. Like, for example, don't buy something that's a 4 hour or 6 hour drive away if you realistically only think you're going to get there on weekends, because you'll spend your whole time driving and eventually it'll just become a pain in the butt. I mean, ours is 10 minutes away, which sounds absurd, but from where we live, um, drive 10 minutes and you're in the middle of nowhere almost. It it's kind of that, um, whatever. It's easy for us to have it, completely different. In 10 minutes, I can be, drive past the liquor store and get some beer and go to the grocery store, pick up the groceries, and 15 minutes, I've got my feet up on the deck, and it's super easy. Not everyone's going to have it that good, but don't buy something too far away. That is would be a key, as you know. But okay,
Like,
you're a bit different though. Like I mean, you're not going to go there for the weekend. That's just reality. And so your experience with that building, at least initially, is, I mean, that's one of your limitations. Uh, like, you don't have the option to drive there on the weekend, so the way you use it will definitely be informed by that, the the trip, the journey of getting there, and then making it worthwhile when you're there.
so it's interesting that what you first said about don't be afraid of difficult land, because the question that I got recently was from someone who's looking at land and she's found that most of it is gently sloping. And her question
Yeah.
was, how much should I be worried about gently sloping land or even land with hills? How much does that impact the difficulty of the build and the cost of the build?
I If it's gently sloping, not at all. It shouldn't really alter cost, just that alone. Um, it it depends on the size of the building. The smaller it is, the easier, obviously, it is to make use of little, a particular one spot or another, uh, especially if you can build on piers, either concrete piers or a helical pile, which is a machine basically puts a big screw into the ground, and it's like a metal screw that then replaces the concrete version. Those, like a pier and beam foundation, is ultimately adaptable to whatever ground you're on. It's simply sitting up above it And so the ground can just slope away as fast as you need. You're not doing much digging, much or any digging. So gently sloping, no problem. Even I personally wouldn't even be scared of like steeply sloping. Just figure it out. Yeah, it's not going to be as easy or as inexpensive. It depends on how motivated you are. But the end result, like if you could perch your cabin on the side of a steep drop off or close to it, just imagine what the view and the sensation will be. Like ours is right on the edge of a 25 or 30-foot drop. And so when you go to the edge of the deck, you're like, whoa, I'm in the trees, because it feels like you're in a tree house. So yeah, I wouldn't be afraid of well, anything, but gently sloping is, yeah, no problem. You don't need flat.
Okay, identifying the location of the cabin on the land, I know is really important in your design. So what advice do you have for this in terms of once you've bought land or you're thinking about a piece of land, how do you figure out where on the land to put the cabin and how to orient it?
The particular spot, I would slow down. That would be the first thing I would say to people. Slow down. Don't or get out of the mindset of, okay, we just bought the land, we got to build. Like, slow down. Take a year and go up there at least once in every season so that you can walk around and see what it looks like, see what it feels like, find some places that you're like, yeah, I could live with looking out my kitchen window and seeing this view, or my bedroom window. Find those spots. Don't put it on the prettiest spot, because then you've destroyed the prettiest spot. Set it a little bit away from that so you can look at the prettiest spot. I personally like view. I don't like the sensation of being closed in, and I'm not sure that I would like a cabin that was buried in a deep dark forest. I like a long view. I like to be able to see some distance, and have lots of natural light. Like, I'm all about light. So making use of natural clearings if you can, so that you're like, if you have to take trees down, you have to take trees down, but most pieces of land have little micro places that are just naturally open, so that you can sort of make use of them and augment the view in some way.
And what about orientation of the cabin to the sunlight? I know that it probably depends on the cabin, but what are your typical recommendations for how you should face it?
I typically, when I'm designing, I design, generally, I want to have the bedroom towards the east, and have most of the glass facing sort of east southeast, so that as the sun arcs around the sky during the day, when it's at its hottest point in the summer, the building is sort of self-protecting. If you think about the angle of the sun at noon on July 1st, when it's just blazing hot, the roof, wherever that is on the building, there are fewer windows and there are more overhangs, and it's sort of protecting itself, but at the same time, oriented so that you get that nice morning sun. You get, for winter time, you get some solar gain early in the day. If you have solar panels, you want to face them towards the sun as well. It's tricky, because if I had a choice, I would start with where the building is going to be and configure the layout based on that particular spot. That's a luxury that most people don't have, and so it then just means adjusting the angle that the building sits on and possibly adjusting where the windows are or the size of the windows. You know, if your best view is dead south, you want to have glass to be able to see that, but you're going to have to protect that glass, or give some more overhang, or do something to make sure that you just don't turn into a greenhouse. So it's important to pay attention to. You could literally, if you don't pay attention to the detail of the angle of the building, you could, you know, have this big giant swath of glass facing into the sun, and your first summer there, you're like, oh my God, I can't stand it. It's too bright, or it's too hot, or whatever. And it's completely avoidable just with pre-planning.
I can't help but listen to all your answers and think about where we made the right choices or where we're gonna regret it later.
We talked about that earlier. I think
Yeah.
it's going to be just fine. And your site looks like there are lots of tall trees, so I think you're not going to be suffering with just like wide open, super hot sun
Yeah.
at any time.
Yeah.
I would guess it looks nicely. The light is broken up
Yeah.
a lot.